Hello to everyone who's introduced themselves in the chat. We're very excited to have you here. This is the fifth workshop in the Climate Strike workshop series. If you've been able to go to the previous ones, or if you haven't, either is fine. We have a worksheet that you can use to kind of take notes to the activity for today, which is linked in the chat right now. You can go ahead and make a copy. Essentially, this workshop series is in preparation for the global strike on March 25th. If you're interested in organizing something or joining our organizing, this is just fun, different activities and learning sessions that we're doing to talk about different areas of climate organizing. I'm going to intro myself in a minute, but I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping real quick. Just because it's on Zoom, we've been doing this for a while, I'm sure everyone knows, but let's try to stay muted when someone else is talking. We always want to be respectful of one another. If you do want to cut in, you can totally react there's like a little react button. You can raise your hand or something, or you can write in the chat. Kat is kindly helping me moderate today and is watching the chat, so that's incredible. Thank you, Kat. If you need closed captions, you can enable those by clicking the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to intro myself, and then we're going to go into a little land acknowledgement. Hello, I'm Liv. I'm an organizer with Fridays for Future US. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based on Tongva and Duwamish land, which is LA and Seattle. My superpower is shark diving. I love the ocean. And I am a climate and ocean policy enthusiast, and I'm very excited to be here today. And to find out whose native land you're on, you can visit native-land.ca. As I said, I'm currently on Tongva land, about an hour east of LA. So feel free to do that. Feel free to share in the chat. A couple people already did. Thank you for doing that, guys. That's awesome. So today, our workshop is activating the press, and this is our agenda. We're going to talk about different types of media. We're going to go into narrative and background. How do we represent an organization? Considerations for pitches, choosing topics to present on or speak on or give interviews on. We're going to go into print media and examples of different variations of that. And then we're going to break down pitch, non-pitch, and requests and kind of the difference between that and how you manage all that. We're going to talk a little bit about various tools like social media versus the traditional press. We're going to talk about conversations with the press, like interviews, stuff like that. We're going to talk about pitching and writing. We're going to talk, or we're going to do an activity. So that's part of what the worksheet is for. So if you want to go into the chat and get that, that is an option. That is a great idea. And then the final bit is going to be kind of talking about getting your story started and how you want to represent yourself and go into interviews and conferences and stuff like that. So starting off, we're just going to broadly go over different types of media. The first category is called broadcast media. This is often request-based, and it includes event coverage. So like film and video, if you're at a climate conference or a strike or something like that, you might get asked to answer a couple questions in a video. You might have an opportunity to represent an organization. So an event, a call, a Zoom, etc. And then a recorded interview. So that now could often be on Zoom or even on set, something like that. Print media could be obviously written. We've got articles that people will write about climate groups or activists. You can submit an op-ed, which is an opinion editorial, or you can release an organization statement. So I'm just going to note really quick that pitches include something that you are requesting other people to share, which includes something you write. So it's not that a written article submission. A non-pitch is every other type of print media. So that would include like a press release or a press advisory on behalf of an organization. And then requests, again, are often interviews and event coverage, all of that. So first, narrative and background. When we're interacting with the press, what we want to do is really get across like the reason why we're doing this, right? Like, what are our missions, the goals of the organization, what we work towards? What are our values? What does our movement specifically stand for? What do we care about? What do we act on? What are we acting towards? What change do we demand? So if you want to look at demand examples, we have the international demands and the Fridays for Future USA national demands linked. The next topic is identity. So how do activists identify personally and as an organization? We all have different reasons for why we chose to get into this, why we choose to organize. So you can definitely do that. And you can also speak about the character of your organization. Nope, skipping forward. And then for identity, there are words that we choose to use to associate ourselves, right? So activist versus environmentalist, or grassroots, local, on the ground, youth-led, etc. A really good idea is using a personal story or an anecdote to connect. Those are often used within op-eds, right, which are opinion pieces, so they're often more personal. But in general, it's a really good way to get your audience to connect to what you're sharing. And then building up the work we do while being cognizant of the space or organization takes within a larger system. So like the greater climate movement, all of that good stuff. So one key part is representing an organization, right? The main thing is that you never want to speak as the group. You want to be clear that you're a person within a group. So I would be like, hi, I'm Liv. I'm an activist organizer with Fridays for Future US. I would share which local group I'm part of. And then it's really important, specifically within Fridays for Future, our organization is non-hierarchical. So we don't really have like leaders or directors. So it's important to kind of recognize that everyone's opinion to some extent is their own, right? And even while you're representing a group, you still are speaking, and you know, other people may choose to represent themselves differently, etc. And yeah, so while you're representing an organization, you definitely want to keep in mind the organization narrative, right? Like we talked about earlier, the goals, demands, vision, and identity. So considerations for pitches. The first one is time. Relevance is super important because news cycles move really, really fast. You want to be mindful of current events. For example, right now, there's a lot of media focused on the situation, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So it's, you know, there are different timelines where they would be willing to take pieces versus when they're focused on, you know, like international conflict or really big events that happen, stuff like that. And then something that you really want to be mindful of is, how is it applicable? What do you add to it? What is your fresh take, your fresh perspective, right? They're interested in an angle, a specific point of view. And then who, right? If you're looking at various media entities to pitch to, you might want to focus on location, or if they focus specifically on specific topics. For example, if I were going to write an op-ed on the Snake River dams, which are in Washington, I would probably submit it to a Washington paper. I probably wouldn't submit it to like the LA Times, etc. And then which reporter. So a lot of media entities, like groups, will have various editors for different topics, right? So if they have a climate editor or an energy editor or an environmental editor, those are really good people to pitch to, right? Because they are going to be the ones that are most knowledgeable and willing to accept those pieces of work. And then the final thing is likelihood. So we all know if you pitch to the New York Times or the Washington Post, you're going to get a pretty slim chance of your article being taken, noting that these are all pitching materials, right? But if you submit to a local paper, you're probably going to have a much better chance of actually getting your op-ed submitted and accepted. So choosing a topic is super important, right? You want to be credible. You want to be a credible author, a credible representative. So you want to pick a topic that you understand deeply or that you're affected by, right? A personal connection is always more insightful. And when you're choosing a topic, it's also like the media is always looking for a new angle on a topic, right? For example, something right now is with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, a lot of, you know, environmental organizers are pushing for the media to cover the role of fossil fuels in global conflict, right? The way that a lot of Russia's strength comes from its oil production. So that's a really important example to cover, right? Because it ties in with climate and the environment as well as the situation. So print media, these are a couple different types. First, we have op-eds, opinion editorials. The New York Times is now calling them guest essays. But usually they're pretty short, about 650 to 800 words. That's a bit of a ballpark. You typically express an opinion from the perspective of the author. and you tend to focus on current issues in the news. So these are often personal. It's often opinionated. It would be like if someone wanted to write a story about a personal climate impact that they experienced, or if they helped to push legislation in their state legislature, something like that, right? It's applicable to you, you're writing it, you're the author, you're telling someone why this is important. And then advisories are on behalf of an organization or a group to talk about an event, a campaign, a launch, etc. Typically released a week or two before. And then you can do like online press events, or you can share a press release. Typically, it's really brief. It's information on schedule and event speakers, information overview. So releases are typically release day of, a few days before the event. Finalized schedule, speakers, attendance overview are usually all included in that, right? It's going to be a bit longer. And then you've got links to media from photos, event photos, tapes, film, all of that good stuff. So we are going to go a little bit deeper into the breakdown between an advisory and a press release. So you've got a press advisory on the left. This is one that Fridays for Future International just sent out. We did a press conference on the newest IPCC report on March 1st. So you can see that it's a bit shorter. It's more concise, right? It gives clear event details. You can see the when right there, including the time, the location, and then usually some speaking information or like bios of representatives, speakers, all of that. The goal is to explain what's happening, but you don't want to give a huge amount of information. You don't want to give all the nitty-gritty details, right? You want to share enough information to intrigue the press, but you want to leave out enough so that they think it's interesting and they're like, oh, okay, like I'll come and attend and write about it. They're usually half a page, about a page, they're not very long. They might be sent a week or two ahead of a strike or an event, or you can use them to announce an organization endorsement, more of like a kind of general mass broadcast, shorter message. The press release on the right, as you can see, is a bit longer. It's usually a page or two. We've got more paragraph, right? You can see we kind of explain the narratives. We explain this is specifically the DC October 22nd strike. We explain the Fridays for Future National Demands launch. We explain what we want. These are for bigger events, including strikes, rallies, announcing campaigns, etc. So social media versus traditional press, right? This is a super interesting topic because of the way that social media has been utilized by youth and by the youth movement. So this is just going to be a quick comparison because, you know, they both have their strengths, they both have their weaknesses. But starting with social media, typically social media they both have generational appeal, right? Social media usually pertains and appeals to a younger audience. It's a quick, guaranteed way of spreading information, right? You don't have to pitch a story, you can just post on Instagram. But a con to that extent is that it is a cause of frequent misinformation, right? It's not as credible. You have to do more fact checking and personal inquiry because it's an informal source. So many youth organizers operate within social media platforms because you're guaranteed to have an ability to share your information, right? And then if we look at traditional press, who reads a newspaper? It's typically geared towards older generations. Everyone has digital access now, right? I've got like the CNN app and New York Times and all that on my phone, but print and paper media are typically older generations. They're fact-checked. They're generally very well respected, clear, you know, well-sourced pieces of information, but that's the exact reason why it's harder to get coverage in them, right? They're highly sought after because they're so well respected. So we're going to transition a bit to conversations with the press. We're going to take a break from this and then we'll come back. So this is more about like building a relationship with reporters, talking to reporters. And this can be either like verbally or written. But the first thing you want to do is you want to set clear expectations and boundaries, right? You want to have clear schedules about writing or publishing, right? Usually there's the deadline. Usually they want to get a story out within like a week or two. So, you know, if they want you to make edits, maybe there's a deadline you have to hit, etc. What's really important is that you build relationships with the reporter and with the media. You know, a really good press connection at a good paper can take you a long way, right? Like if you have a reporter at, say, the Washington Post, who is their energy editor or their environmental editor, who you like, and they know that you're a good writer and they take your stuff. Like, that is a great contact on behalf of an organization or a person, because that is a resource, right? The main thing is that you want to make the press work for you, right? Like, they're looking for what you have to say. You're the prize to be won. So it's important that you share what you want to share and that you don't feel pushed to share things that are beyond that. You can totally use on and off the record. It's very valid to say, like, hey, like, if you're pitching an exclusive, which means you're giving it to one person, you can say, hey, like, off the record, I can give you this information about this event following, but like, we'll give you this information once you post this, or like once you share this. Is kind of like to make it a continuing story. You want to be really careful of what you're saying, though, right? Because like I talked about earlier, it's all about kind of creating anticipation and suspense. You want to preview the upcoming events in action, and you want to give them enough information to be intrigued and to think it's a good topic to write on, but you want to leave something to be desired, right? You don't want to give them a full press release right before, right? Because then they'll have all the information. And maybe there's a piece of the story you want them to experience at the event. But another really important thing is that you decide your narrative. And this doesn't just apply to organizations or groups, it applies to people, right? Like, young people every day, people of all ages, submit opinions, editorials about whatever they want to media. Press coverage doesn't require millions of strikers or huge climate rallies. Individual people can share their stories and are trailblazers. Greta has been a very used example of that, but there are other people who are doing great work who are also being recognized in media for what they're doing. So part 2, you should feel free to lead the conversation. If the interview is scheduled, you can ask for the questions ahead of the interview, right? So that you can prepare. And then another really important thing is that the content you're sharing is yours, right? If something's been twisted, taken out of context, or it's been misrepresented, you should feel free to set the record straight. If you feel like the piece is being changed in a way that you don't want it to, you can pull it. You can, like, the reporter will ask things of you, but you can also ask things of them, right? It's a mutually beneficial, hopefully, relationship. And then, unless you were given like explicit parameters, feel free to add in like related topics, right? Like, you can add things that weren't explicitly mentioned to give a new angle, to give a new perspective. They can usually always edit that out. So the initial pitch, and this is usually just for pitching a written article, pitching an op-ed, right? Because you're not really going to pitch a press release, because you're just going to send a press release. So for a pitch breakdown, you'd start with a catchy subject line, right? I get way too many emails. I can't imagine being a New York Times reporter, because they probably get like thousands of submissions a week. So when you're scrolling through your email, like, you're going to want to see something interesting, right? If there's an interesting title, you're like, oh, wow, that's cool. I want to write about that. Then you should introduce yourself. You should explain why the piece and idea is current and newsworthy, right? Why is it special? Why should they write about it? And then another great thing is, why would that specific magazine or specific paper be interested? Like, what do they have that might make them a better paper to write about it, to publish it, etc. Then you want to establish why you're credible, why the author has a unique perspective. So you want to give a bit of a bio, maybe organization roles, some experience you've had in the area that you're writing about. And then it's always helpful to request a timely response or explain the deadline, right? It goes both ways. You can sign off professionally. You should probably do some way that they can contact you, your email, your full name, cell number, a bio, stuff like that. And then you want to put the writing sample, right? Usually you want to put this all within the email. Like, they often won't open an attached document. So if you like attach a Word document, that's going to be a little harder. But if you sign off and you do your signature and then you paste your written explanation below that, that should be good. And then the pitch should consist of your idea, briefly, your relevant credentials, your contact information, and it should be, not too long. It should be pretty brief. put your whole finished piece into the email, no attachments, no links. And then the really important thing to note is that pitching is essentially offering your entire idea and your writing to an outlet. So if you pitch to multiple outlets at the same time and they both say yes, they don't want to both write it, or they don't want to both show it, right? Because then they want exclusive information, exclusive writing, exclusive topics. So usually a 24-hour rule is good. If you pitch to one outlet, they don't respond, you can pitch to another one. But yeah, generally, don't mass pitch an op-ed. Follow up. If you get no response, you can send them an hour in 24 hours confirming that if they pass, if they don't respond, that they have decided not to run the article. You can choose that time frame. It's usually about a day or two. You should thank the reporter for their consideration, even if they say no, right? Like sometimes there's a lot of great material, but they just don't have room for all of it. Maintain a professional relationship. You can reach out to them on your next piece. Maybe they will like it better. Maybe they'll have suggestions. Maybe they'll take it. And then, like I said earlier, you can note which reporters are more willing to take your pieces, right? Like if you have an established relationship with an editor, with a reporter, they're a really good resource because they often will be more likely to take your stuff. And then oftentimes if they say yes, they'll ask you to edit, right? And editing is great. We all edit, same thing as an essay, right? You want to turn in a good piece that's not just a rough draft. So they'll often request specific edits. But again, if the editing is something that you don't feel like is the correct direction of the piece, it is your writing. It's ultimately your decision. You can pull it. You can say, no, thank you. Can we do it a different way? But, being polite and maintaining conversation. Yeah, so there are a couple questions in the chat. The Fridays for Future press release for reference, if you go to www.fridaysforfutureusa.org, up in the header, there's a piece that says media. If you look at media, we have attached a bunch of press releases there. And then, we can provide a press release template. Usually they're structured the same, so you kind of just, fill in the blanks from a different one. And then, like I said earlier, you can pitch an exclusive, right? And, maybe they're more likely to say yes if you say that, oh, you can have this story, like this is all yours, I'm not pitching to anyone else, right? That's exciting. Yes, Tad is going to send the links. Amazing. And then going on to press releases, you should always submit a press release in a non-editable format, right? You don't want anyone changing what you're saying. The likelihood of that is slim, but, still. So for example, we submit a lot of ours as non-editable Google documents, right? We don't typically attach documents. We'll typically hyperlink it in the email, right? So they can just click on it and open it. Or you could attach a PDF, right? Whatever you want to do. But don't let them have edit access. Suggestions fine, but you should know what your original writing was. So the structure of your press release is going to be your headline, right? It's going to be the most important news. This is how you're going to get their attention, right? You're going to do your introductory paragraph. Should be short, hard-hitting. Should it describe the event, what you're doing, why it's special? What's the problem? What is the event being organized around? Why are you concerned? Why is your event or campaign or launch or whatever, why is it the solution? Why are you taking action? How can we solve the problem? What is the goal? The second piece should be, what is the demand, right? Like, what are you asking for? What do you want? You should include your contact information so that the media can contact you for more information. Oftentimes they'll reach out and they'll say like, hey, we want more organizer quotes, right? More bios, stuff like that. And then you should also, if you want, attach information on speakers or quotes from activists, stuff like that. You could add notes if you have any comments about editing. If there are things that are not set in stone, you could say like, hey, this may be subject to change. This is our best understanding of this at the moment. Staying updated on the content is always good. All right, so our first activity is going to be actually writing a media pitch for a campaign. For those of you who attended the week 2 workshop, basically what we did is we had people design their own narrative, like we talked about earlier, and kind of come up with like a little hashtag for an environmental movement or a social movement that they are interested in. So for example, the upcoming climate strike on the 25th, the global strike narrative is hashtag people not profit. So that's an example of a narrative. But you can feel free to use the workshop to write and fill it out. This is the press release kind of structure right here, structure and tips. And then we're going to go through a few tips later, but are people interested in doing breakout rooms, or do you guys want to work in the main room? Or I'm trying to get a good idea of how we should do this. I think working in the main room is probably fine. But if anyone wants to do breakout rooms, that's totally an option. Are there any questions or comments? Perfect. Annabelle says main room. That sounds great. Let's do that. Let's stay here. I can go back. I'll go back to that advisory versus press release slide just so we can kind of see what they look like right here. I'll minimize my video so you can see the full screen. Yeah, so if you guys want to pick one of the two to write, you can do it in the worksheet. And yeah, you can pick a topic. You could write about the global strike. You could like make up a time, but basically the main goal is you want to kind of pitch your event to explain why it's important, why you want to do it, why it should be covered. So yeah. how do we feel like, are we interested in sharing what we wrote? Do you guys want to kind of give us a brief overview of what you wrote? It might be a little long to put in the chat, but you could give like a brief summary, or if you want, you can unmute yourself, or let me know what you think. Yeah, definitely. And like, what were some of the things that you found difficult about this, or like that you enjoyed?
Hi. So I made mine about like the water crisis we have in Las Vegas. It's only getting worse, and we're actually getting we were expecting more rain to come this winter, but it hasn't arrived. So I think that like I'm gonna focus with my group about the water shortage and about how that's affecting our communities and like the larger span of it. Also with public transportation. The public transportation is really difficult. It used to take my husband 2 hours to get to work, even though it's about a 15-20 minute drive. So I'd like to focus on public transportation and the water crisis. And I'd like to definitely write something up with a bunch of resources as much as I can, and reach out to any of my local reporters and authors and such.
That sounds wonderful. Awesome. Amazing. Loving the diversity of topics here. That's great. Perfect. All right. Anyone else want to share? No pressure.
I talked about the how the spam to my camera. I talked about how I have like I don't know, but the hashtag thing was gonna be hashtag palm oil's up to no good, and it was just about how the organization, the palm oil industry, has the money and resources to make the production of palm oil more sustainable, but they won't because they don't find a need. And so I thought that I could talk about how we need more people to like tell people about why it's bad so that they do find a need, because nobody's like using it and stuff.
That's wonderful. Great job. That's super cool. Awesome work. You guys should really write these. These are great. And now you have the tools to pitch them. You should definitely do that. That's super cool. Wonderful. All right. Does anyone else want to go? No pressure, I promise. I can give a brief example. I can talk more about the IPCC press release if any of you guys are interested in on how we wrote them. But that's if, okay, perfect. So let's do that. Here, let me find the slide. We got a bit to go here. Yeah, so it's the one on the left right here. Basically, this one is a media advisory that Fridays for Future International sent out. We had a press conference on March 1st about the working group IPCC report that just came out a couple days ago. It's still coming out in various segments, but what we do is we essentially work with some of the authors of the report, some of the scientists who were involved, and we ask them about general, climate impacts. What does the report mean? How does this apply to youth movements? So obviously I could only show you a snippet of this, but basically what we did was we had the concrete information, right? The when and the where. We gave a super brief background on the importance of the report, why Fridays for Future works with the scientists, etc. And then below, if I had the document, I could scroll down, but it was speaker information. So we had a couple of activists from the group who were actually leading the conference, right? Were panelists, were asking the reporters questions, asking the panelists from like the science group. So that is what our advisories typically look like. And then the example earlier I also gave was our October 22nd global strike press release. I already went through kind of the characteristics of it a bit, but you can see that these kind of three main body paragraphs right here really elaborated on our narrative and, why we thought this strike was important, why we chose to have it, We talked about our demands. We talked about our identity. We talked about our values, right? Conference of Parties, international climate action, stuff like that. But yeah, so that is a brief overview of that one. But if anyone else wants to share, feel free. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Kat's linking both of them right now. But if you have questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand, unmute yourself, whatever. I can totally answer them. We've got about 10 more minutes, and the activity is the final thing on our to-do list, save for talking a bit about just, getting comfortable speaking with the press. So if anyone has any questions, let me know, or we can go to the last slide. Okie doke, I'm gonna take that as a no. That is perfectly well. So basically, this is kind of the fun part, right? Getting your story started. A fun part about when you do a lot of press work, if you work a lot with reporters, if you're replying to a bunch of reporter emails, all this stuff, is you kind of develop a little story in your head, right? And each time you do it, it gets easier. Each time you kind of have the automatic speech that you would normally give, and then you can pull bits and pieces of it. You can add different chunks. You can kind of edit it in your head a bit. But basically the summary of what I'm saying is that practice makes perfect, right? So muscle memory, right? The more often you do it, the more comfortable it is. And if you're asked a question you weren't expecting, if you have a brain blank, whatever, you can kind of you can recover more easily because you've had more practice doing it. So practicing in front of the mirror, always a great idea. And then another really helpful tip is you should start with requests that let you craft your answers, right? Like if you start with newspaper reporters, written pieces, if they're giving you the questions ahead of time, you can prepare, you can answer them, you can email back your statement. That's a lot easier to get started with than doing live interviews, right? Because you can kind of craft your narrative, you can decide what you want to talk about, you can figure out a way to mesh in the identity, the values, the demands, the goals, all that good stuff. So that is usually a helpful progression, right? To kind of get control over what you're saying, get comfortable with it, and then go to more on the spot stuff. But live interviews are also super fun, right? You're kind of nervous, there's a bit of adrenaline, it's a good time. And then the last bit is that there are some things that you just should not say in an interview. Obviously nothing offensive or anything of that regard, but what I'm getting at is when we announce global strikes, typically an organization will know specific details of an event before it's released, right? You'll know the strike date, you'll know where it is. And because releasing that information is really fun and really valuable and important, it's important to not leak a strike date before the organization releases it, right? So kind of general stuff like that. But in the meanwhile, it's really fun because you get to represent an organization, you get to talk about the work you do and why you're passionate about it. And it's a really good tool to get coverage of events and, all that good stuff. So yeah, this is all the stuff I have for us today, but here is some of my contact information. If you guys have any questions, we've got all the Fridays for Future US, social media, the email, all that. My personal email, my Instagram. If you want to reach out with questions to either of those, please feel free. We're hoping to continue these workshops, right? We've got another one. Feel free to attend. Yeah, it's been really fun doing this. I hope you've learned something. Feel free to use the worksheet that we handed out, right? You can take notes. All of the previous workshops are going up on the YouTube, right? And there's also information on the Instagram. So if you missed one, if you want to learn about a specific topic, right? There's a really cool one that one of my friends did on art and demonstration and the role of art and all of that good stuff in movements. So if you're interested in that or any other topic, feel free to watch on the YouTube. You can take the notes, all that good stuff. Yeah, so yeah,
Good.
all the info's at the link Kat sent. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. And I think that that's absolutely correct, right? Media is only a small piece of the tools available, right? And that's awesome. Like the media should be criticized, right? Like they are not giving enough credit to climate activists. They're not covering enough climate story. They're not covering the narratives we want them to cover, right? The media does play a huge role in this, and they're most of the time they're in the wrong, right? Because they're not covering what we want them to cover. So that's a very great point. And all of these are just various tools that you can use within your organizing, but that's really, it's important to mention that like a lot of times the work gets done behind the scenes, right? There are a lot of people that get a lot of media credit and get a lot of attention for the work they're doing, but if your work isn't getting covered by like the New York Times, that does not make it any less valid, right? If you're organizing because you want to organize, if you're organizing because you're passionate about it, you shouldn't, it's not about like getting credit for it, right? It's valid either way. So that's a fantastic point. And I think that's important to remember for everyone, because everyone here clearly is very engaged and making contributions and doing all the great things. But yeah, so thank you so much, Lonnie, and everyone for participating. We were so excited to have you today. Again, feel free to visit FFFUS website, all that good stuff. We've got the socials right there. You can email, you can reach out, use the worksheet, check out the future workshops, follow the Instagram and all that to see what we're doing next. Prep for the global strike. You can check in with us to get involved. It's going to be great. So excited. But yeah, so thank you for hopping on today. Let me know if you have questions.